And show your PPT.
Okay.
Okay.
I've seen. I've checked it out. Okay, I think I'll start.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so this is the final class for MDI 1, and we pick up Unit 6. We, combined the first and the second unit in the earlier classes, and then we combined the fourth, the third, fourth, and fifth unit. This gives you an overview about MDI 1, which is the theory and methodology. Now, in the earlier classes, we looked at the fact that the history of human beings is a history of migration. If you technically look at things, all of us in every part of the world is actually an African diaspora, because the evolution of human beings happened in Africa and they traveled across. So everybody understands that there is a continuous migration, a continuous movement of people. Uh, with the formation of nation states, the diaspora had formed, with the starting of the nation states. The diaspora was there before only, but the scholarly pursuit or the academic pursuit and the concept of diaspora came subsequently. So now, when nations know that people are permanently moving internally and externally, what is that thing which makes or breaks migration, which is typically the politics of migration governance? So let's look at what is this politics. And we've seen politics becomes a very important element of the whole way things move in this world. At the end of the day, behind everything, there's a large engine of politics, and if we do not understand the politics, we will not be able to understand why things happen the way they happen. So let's look at the units. A quick recap, as we always do. Migration is permanent or semi-permanent change of residence caused by various factors. Phenomena of international migration have been explained in you cannot explain it in a one particular way. It has to be in an interdisciplinary perspective. We looked at transnationalism and globalization, essentially both meaning the same in terms of free flow of capital, ideas, and people. And this has all come about with an increasing connectivity, a faster means of transportation, a better means of transportation, and connectivity and internet. And so the local, the national and the international almost merges into each other. There are estimated 281 million people living in countries other than countries of birth in 2020, which is 128 million. And this it's a continuous phenomenon. Projects the number of international migrants will be over 400 million. And essentially, if this migration is not properly managed, it creates chaos. We looked at the push and pull factors of migration. There are the economic factors and the non-economic factors, both push and pull. So this is what it looks like. And inevitably, both these factors contribute in people migrating. When we look at summing up Unit 4 and 5, we looked at the fact that migration is a complex issue, 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, in which 10 of the 17 goals contains targets and indicators relevant to migration or mobility. So essentially, we need to understand people will migrate, and the migration is always towards a perceived or real, uh, betterment of life. And I always use the term perceived or real because many a times it is perceived, it may not be real, but nevertheless, real or perceived, people migrate. And migration always, we looked at the fact that migration has costs. There are economic determinants to migration in the sense that there's a cost to go abroad, there's a social cost in terms of a new culture, a new language, a new way of life. You are being uprooted from your current state in terms of your family, friends. your the environment that you've grown up with. It's a dynamic phenomena response to complex range of factors include geopolitical situation to technology. Technology change has become a very important factor. It's not a deterministic factor, but it is one of the very important factors. Increase of global population, demand for scarce resources, aging population, world of flow of migration will be constantly changing. So we looked at the fact that, let's say, the global north is an aging population because the number of children have gone down. With the aging population, you need caregivers. The caregivers are coming from global south. Then there is the politics of immigrants and so on and so forth, increasing case of anti-immigration and anti-migrant attitude across. That also is driven by politics, identity politics. It is very important to manage migration better for sustainable development. So unless countries, nations are able to manage migration now, obviously we need to understand migration is not a one nation or two nation issue because migrants move from one nation to another, they transit through a third nation. You need to have collaborations between nations, you need to work out how to do, and that is all migration governance, politics of migration governance. So let's look at the objective of this unit, understand what is migration, different instruments of migration regime, impact of politics, challenges posed. And there are multiple challenges. It might look very simple. What is there? People are migrating. Why can't? So there is a underlying a lot of engines which are at work. So emerged as one of the most critical non-traditional security challenges for nation states. And more often than not, many nations today, in today's time and age, are looking at migration as a security challenge. Now, or it may not be a security challenge, but it is framed in terms of a security challenge. Bearing the brunt of two world wars and a cold war, all countries should have understood significance of peaceful cooperation. And it's a very interesting thing. After two world wars, human beings realized the fact that wars was never a solution. After millions of people had died, and yet we see that new wars are every day. New wars are being initiated. People are still dying. It's like there is a collective amnesia which seems to have happened. So that is what is happening. Mixed experience in terms of cooperation and conflicts. Human population increases, so are its renewed aspirations, and every human being has got aspirations. So we were questioning the fact that in the 17th or the 18th and the 19th century, when there was colonization, the global north came and colonized the global south and took resources, exploited the land and the manpower. And now when the global south wants to do better and travels to the global north, there is this politics, the identity politics, which is playing out. Politics of migration plays a crucial role in managing the migration process associated with origin countries, transit countries, and destination countries. So there are, multiple stakeholders in play, multiple, and these are countries. So countries have bureaucracies, countries have politics. So what is politics of migration governance that shape and regulate states' approach with regard to migration in all its forms? Addressing rights and responsibilities and promoting international cooperation. Because at the end of the day, every action of the state has a consequence. So, for example, one of the factors of U.S. economy is the presence of international students. I was reading somewhere or seeing this particular news item which talked about almost 4 lakh Indian students in the U.S. studying in the U.S. in 2024 and adding about $1 billion+ in the US economy. Now, with US, dragging its feet on students, both Indian and international, and bringing in barriers for these students to come in. The universities which make a lot of get a lot of money from these students who want to study in the US universities. Now that will go, those students then contribute to the local economy in terms of buying things, and because of globalization everything is connected. How this works out, basically there is, it almost says that the cooperation has fallen down. According to IOM, migration governance may be defined as combined frameworks of legal norms, laws and regulations, policies and traditions, organization structures, relevant process. That's why it's a complicated issue. You have to first start with by recognizing the fact that migration is happening and will happen. And if you create barriers to migration, obviously, then the migration goes through the illegal route. So, legal norms, laws and regulations only come in terms of a legal norm, then policies and traditions, organization structures, and relevant processes. Migration governance frameworks considers to incorporate several dimensions including policy on travel and temporary mobility. So, for example, if a person comes they, and might be using it as a transit, there's a temporary mobility, travel, immigration, emigration, nationality, labor markets, economic, and so on. What happens if a person comes in? If a person comes in, does he get a job? Does he get a productive employment? Do you put him in a him or her in a detention center? After all, everything is going to impact everything else: social cohesion, social services, health, education. So if a person comes and he and the family joins, what happens to the family? What happens to the children? Is the education given to them? Is the state taking care of the education? Is the state taking care of their welfare? There are humanitarian issues. There is a foreign policy issue. There are trade issues. The politics of migration has been increasing over the years. Formulation and implementation of immigration policies, border control, integrated processes providing right to refugees and asylum seekers, etc. And inevitably, we need to understand why do people migrate. It is a tremendous cost on them to migrate. So if a person is migrating, there might be some extraneous circumstances which gets people to migrate. Obviously there will always be that security angle in terms of criminals, or in terms of bad characters, or non-state actors wanting to create disturbance. But today with modern means of surveillance and modern means of understanding, tracking specific people, so there is a whole lot of understanding in terms of what happens in terms of migration. Deeper understanding of global north and global south representing the developed and the developing countries. And inevitably, the developed countries, as we keep talking about the fact, look at the irony of America. America is a land of immigrants. Everybody is an immigrant out there. And yet, they are creating, problems for immigrants to come in. Dynamics associated with migrant origin countries, transit countries, receiving countries, so needs to be looked about to comprehend the politics of migration. Why do certain countries, get migration to happen? Or why, say, for example, we got to find out as the Ukraine-Russian war broke out that almost 20,000 students from India were doing medicine in Ukraine. I recently was reading about a whole lot of Indian students going to Vietnam to study medicines, where the cost is very affordable, unlike the medical education cost in India. And obviously, then the origin country, which is, for example, India, needs to upgrade its infrastructure, upgrades its, various, things to get those people to, because inevitably when people will migrate, you are losing, you're losing foreign capital, you're losing money, which would have been typically, done in India or spent in India, needs to be understood through the complex interplay between institutions, political economy, post colonization, neo colonization, and all these forces which develop social inequalities. So, why would an Indian student go to Ukraine or Vietnam to study? A couple of reasons could be the fact that the Indian student has not been able to get an admission in the Indian system. The cost of education in the Indian system is very high. The quality of education in Ukraine or Vietnam seems to be much better in wherever the Indian student. And then there is this modalities of going out. Inevitably, money is going out. That money is going out in foreign exchange, and then it affects the GDP. Then once the student goes out, there is a chance that the student then becomes a global student, takes a job somewhere else. Uh, 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 the country loses its skill. It's almost like a brain drain, and basically stems from social inequality. Influenced by structural factors including symbolic power and discursive resources, technologies of government, conduits of money and violence, as well as inequalities such as race, class, gender, age, sexuality, caste being another, inequality. All these things add to how and why people go about. For example, Punjab was a case study where the prevalence of drugs got families to push their youngsters to emigrate out because the environment in the rural Punjab was detrimental to the growth of young people. International migration intersects with transnational includes development, trade, security, environment change, conflict resolution, human rights and humanity. Nearly impossible to manage it unit, and obviously it is impossible to manage unilaterally by any state. States are already statehood is anyway a complex issue now. So unless there are more other states as well as non-state actors which are roped in to work out this cause, it will always work out against the migration. Multilateral approach is needed where all countries can come together, devise a sustainable migration policy for common welfare. For example, there are students going from, let's say, going from here to another country. Why aren't these two countries entering into an MOU so that there is a safe, orderly movement of these students? There is the way the students are able to get a practical training. They are able to be absorbed back in case they come back. uh, unless there is some sort of a legal mechanism, there is some sort of a MOU, it will always, and then in all these things, there will be this nefarious elements will take advantage. Engage with multiple countries, home, transit, and destination countries. The transit itself could be multiple countries. Essential to have some global mechanisms to govern the principles of migration. And that needs to be a rule based governance. It cannot be an ad hoc to manage and resolve migration related issues efficiently with global community help. So, a regime cannot come out and say you can do this or you cannot do this. There has to be some rule based thing, because in the absence of a rule based thing and in the presence of an ad hoc thing, then exceptions are not seen or not adhered to. Nation take care of their policies in their respective countries at the domestic level, but international level, it's quite a challenge to bring consensus. There is no world government. So, for example, uh, uh, if there are undocumented migrants from a particular country in another country, how does one, work out unless there is some rule-based, thing in place or an instrument put in place? What do? You push them out. You throw them in another country. You throw them in a prison. That is not a rule-based system. Has to be multi-layered, multi-level, scope and reach at national, regional, global level. For example, when COVID happened and the country imposed a lockdown, the system did not understand the fact that larger part of our Indian cities is composed of migrants. Now, these migrants were left high and dry, and they had no choice but to. And when impose a lockdown with no transportation, what do these migrants do? And then we saw photographs of these migrants walking back to their villages. So obviously, whoever was deciding did not think through. It was not multi-layered, it was not multi-level in terms of states coordinating, in terms of districts coordinating, in terms of a national and state policy trying to coordinate as to how do these guys go back, what happens to their children, what happens to food and amenities. Imperative for sovereign states to consider all relevant non-state actors to formulate effective. And there are all these non-state actors. These are multilateral agencies. There are NGOs. There are community-based organizations. There are individuals, and unless you are going to talk to them or take their help, the state cannot do everything because it's a complex function. Three principles and three objectives to implement humane, orderly, and well managed. For example, in COVID, we saw it was neither humane, neither orderly, neither well managed because nobody thought through. And similarly, we are seeing this in terms of the current US regime, clamping down on immigration. It is not humane, it's not orderly, it's not well managed. So there is three principles: adherence to international standards and fulfillment of migrant rights. At the end of the day, after World War II, the world community or the world walked and talked about human rights. There was a UN was set up. There were global principles set up in terms of rights, in terms of humanity. It all seems to be fallen on the ground. Status of migrants regardless of nationality as per international law. Right to safety, physical integrity, well-being and dignity must be preserved. So when the photographs of Indian migrants, undocumented migrants in the US, coming back in chains, tied in chains and being sent back in chains in planes, was not adhering to the international standards and fulfilling migrants' rights. Rights related to family reunification work, residency, and citizenship. In many countries today, they separate parents from children. That is not adhering to international standards at all. This photograph, they might be undocumented, but they are human beings. And from whichever nation they have come from, if there is there is an identity politics being played out, they could just be sent back as normal people. They were not criminals. Evidence and whole of government approaches to migration government. State migration related institutional, legal, and regulatory frameworks through analysis of transparency and coherence in migration management. Why is a state doing whatever it is doing? Why is it stopping migration? Or why is it increasing, specific sets of people to come to a particular nation? Take out of all ministry with it. And remember, the state is not just one ministry. So you have to look at the health of the migrant. So there is the Ministry of Health. You have to look at food. So food and agriculture. You have to look at labor. So Ministry of Labor. You have to look at child care. So you have to Ministry of Child. So there are multiple ministries involved. And inevitably, in the absence of a legal framework, in the absence of a law, in the absence of policies, uh, just about everybody doing their own stuff, inevitably, there is no order or management involved. Broader interests of the countries can be advanced, because we have also realized in the all the units that we have done till now, immigration is good for a country in terms of increases GDP. It gets people with specific skills. It brings in innovation. It gets people to do stuff which is not being done by the natives. So there is a whole lot of contribution which immigrants do to a nation, to a country, both to host as well as home state. Strong partnerships to support migration governments, cooperate on migration related issues with other state, non state actors like NGOs, civil society, private sector are assessed under the principles. So these are the IOM's migration governance frameworks, three principles, additional three objectives: socio-economic well-being of migration. So you have a migrant, and if the migrant, the state is not taking care of the well-being, stability, education, that migrant will, there will be issues. So, there are, and when you have this discursive things about migrants being criminals and migrants doing this, it does not help and remember, the migrant is anyway not in his home. He's in a alien place. There is an alien culture. He or she is scared. He or she does not know the language. So there has to be some way for hand holding, for socio-economic well-being. Policies need to be designed to foster strong socio-economic outcome for the migrant. So if there is a socio-economic well-being of the migrant, obviously he or she will contribute to the host country's economy and the host country's society, and so on and so forth. Responses to the mobility dimensions of crisis. Environmental disasters, war. So, for example, there is a war between Cambodia and Thailand right now. So, obviously, from the border areas, or when there was this war between India and Pakistan, from the border areas, people needed to move out. Where do they go? How? What happens to their food? What happens to their stay? What happens to the children's education? Root cause of crisis, long-term approaches need towards recovery, transition, and sustainable development. And today, the countries need to be prepared for these kind of crises or eventualities. If again, if the countries are not prepared, then it becomes a major crisis in terms of strain on the economy. Safe, orderly, and dignified pathways of migration. Border controls, enforcement policies, criteria for admission of migrants, resilience and preparedness, human trafficking and smuggling of migrant, integration of returning citizens. So, in the absence of state having a proper response, migration will move into the trafficking and the smuggling route. And if they move into the trafficking and the smuggling route, then it is detriment to the migrant as well as to the state, because now the state does not know that there are these migrants who are either trafficked or smuggled inside. would work with national and international justice and security to collect, analyze, and use information intelligence to address migration. And it is not very difficult today for states to do that. You know very well, for example, there is a civil war happening in Syria, not anymore. Civil war having in Syria. So people are migrating from Syria. They are moving into Turkey. From Turkey, they are moving into Europe. Now, this can be gathered out of intelligence. So how are the states getting prepared for these migrants to come in? So one is institutional capacity, institutional framework, migration strategy, legal framework, transparency and coherence, data gathering and information. In the absence of any data, so for example, in the Indian politics, there is a lot of talk about Bangladeshis. How many Bangladeshis are there? What are they doing? Why have they come? Recently, for example, it was found out that the GDP, the per capita income of Bangladesh seems to have gone up above India. So why are Bangladeshis coming here? What kind of work are they doing? In the absence of data gathering and information availability, how are you making a policy? Migrants' right, access to basic social service, family right, right to work, long-term residency, and part two citizenship. And everything cannot be looked at by the state through a security lens. Because if you start looking at everything from a security lens, then everything becomes ad hoc. And then you start looking at everybody with suspicion. And that does not augur well for the state and its agencies. Safety and orderly migration, border control and enforcement, admission and eligibility criteria, reintegration policies, combat human trafficking and smuggling. And again, as I said, whenever legal routes start getting boarded or stopped, inevitably things go underground or illegal. And in fact, when things go underground and illegal, now you neither have the data, neither have the information, and it is detrimental to the state and to its people. Then, in terms of labor migration management, so whenever people will come in, they would need to do some work. When they need to do some work, has the state identified what kind of work they want? So, for example, today, when you look at the country and its various states, why doesn't the state come out with say that this is the kind of work this state is looking at? We are looking at masons, we are looking at carpenters, we are looking at contractors, we are looking at IT specialists. This is the kind of, there are never any white papers brought out which says that we are looking at these. For example, if you look at Canada came out recently, they've changed their immigration policies and they said we are going to get preference to people who have the following skills. Now, the same can be done in terms of various states of India. This state needs these kind of people. We need agriculture labor. These are the number of agriculture labor you want. If in case if you want to work in, let's say, this state of Delhi or state of Maharashtra, this is whom you need to contact. Because in the absence, when you do it the legal route, you have data in terms of how many people are coming in, from where are they coming in, are they coming in alone or they're coming in families, then you can manage that. Bilateral labor agreements, migrant remittances. So, for example, uh, it, look at the fact, India to Nepal, you do not have a visa. People can go from India into Nepal and Nepal into India. But to transfer money from India to Nepal it's a very difficult thing. And inevitably, in the absence of easy legal processes, then illegal processes spawn up. Hawala movement happens, and in that case it is harmful for the state. So all these things need to be kind of worked out, looked at. Then there are regional and international cooperations and other partnership. Regional cooperation, bilateral agreement, global corporations, other partnership. Because at the end of the day, no nation, no individual, no organization, no nation can do it alone. Because anything which is beyond a nation's boundary, the nation needs help. And the only way to do it is through cooperation. So if many people are going from, let's say, India into the Gulf, is India having a bilateral agreement with the Gulf states, individual Gulf states or the Gulf Cooperation as to what kind of people are happening, what happens if there is a crisis, what happens if there is a trafficking issue, how is repatriation happening, etc., etc. Migration regime can simply be defined as national, regional, and international effort to codify and manage migration. At the end of the day, if you are not managing, but there is an old saying that if you can't measure, you can never manage. So, very important to measure, and the only way to measure is to make it legal, to allow people, if somebody is migrating, to be able to allow them legally to happen. Otherwise, they will take the illegal route, you will not measure, and you cannot manage. So then there are instruments of migration regime. For example, there is a 1951 Refugee Convention, documents governing laws related to refugees. Now, there is a mixed migration. There could be refugees, there could be students, there could be political, asylum seekers, there could be smuggled people, and all taking the same route. Multilateral treaty ratified by 145 states. People living outside their home countries who are unable or unwilling to return home because of well-founded fear of persecution are defined as refugees. For example, in the US, this big thing that has happened in terms of anti-migration sentiment. They picked up a US national and sent him back into an El Salvador prison, saying that he was a gang member. There was a huge uproar about it. There was a lot of talk in the media about it. They are picking up people randomly and saying these are if there is a refugee and an asylum seeker and fears persecution back from wherever that migrant has come from, internationally, as per the 51 refugee convention, the country cannot send that person back. Definition of a refugee, right of a displaced, and legal obligations of states to protect them. Some of the crucial principles of crucial importance are non-discrimination, non-penalization, non-refoulement. Force cannot be forcibly returned or expelled against their will to the territories where they have a threat to their life and freedom. So, the person might be undocumented, the person is not an alien. He's a human being. He or she is a human being. They are undocumented. So there are two things a state can do is either to enable or help them get documented so that now that person comes into the system. And if there is some reason for the state to believe that that person is a risk to the state, then in an orderly manner to be able to repatriate back to the home country. Then there is ILO Migration for Employment Convention. Again, as I said, when people migrate, primarily they do it for work. So there is an ILO Migration for Employment Convention, 1949. See, most of these conventions and instruments were post World War II. When humanity realized the fact that war was not a solution, cooperation, peace and cooperation was a much better way to go about internationally. Enforced in 52, member countries need to provide information relating to national policies on immigration, concerning the conditions of work and livelihood of migrants to the ILO whenever requested. concerning migration in abusive conditions, promoting of equality of opportunity, treatment of migration workers. Each member respect the human rights of all migrant workers. So they might be migrant workers, but they are humans and they have rights. Authors of manpower trafficking can be prosecuted whenever a country from which so they have given an exception in this instrument. So if there is if in case a person traffics another person, that person can be prosecuted. 1990 International Convention on the Protection of Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. So inevitably, whenever a person goes, there is a family, and if the family wants to join, then there has to be some way of protection of their rights. Vulnerability of migrant workers, their families, because of absence from their state of origin to the present in the state of employment, monitored by Office of High Commission for Human Rights, came into force in 2003. No major migrant receiving state in Europe or North America has ratified this convention. So that's where the politics come in spite of the fact that most of these states in Europe were colonizing states and they colonized global south, used their resources, they have not ratified this protection of rights of migrant workers and their members of the family. Then the Palermo Protocol. So you will hear this Palermo Protocol a lot. This has to do with human trafficking, supplements the United Nations Conventions against transnational organized crime, protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, 2000. So you will hear a lot. There is a whole unit, MDI 9 and MDI 10, which is on trafficking, where you will hear Palermo Protocol, this keyword a lot. Problems associated with trafficking persons lead to inhuman, degrading, and dangerous. Because at the end of the day, everything that is happening in terms of state, citizens, uh, and the world is the story of human beings. And if the human beings themselves, even after these many years of evolution and civilization, are still not, are having some basic rights, then, the whole thing falls on its face. Applies to prevention, investigation, and prosecution of traffic offenses as well as the protection of trafficked person. Trafficking has again, rather than gone down, has increased because, as I keep saying, every time when countries try and bring in protection, bring in border control, prevent immigration, inevitably migration goes underground and comes out in the form of smuggling and trafficking. Protocol against smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air. So there is this to prevent, combat smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air. Uh, what they used, what it is commonly called the donkey route. You go through and you hear this news item about this dingies by which these migrants cross the Mediterranean Sea and the ship sinks, migrants die. Cooperation, exchange of information, appropriate measures like social, economic at national, regional, and international levels. Then instruments of guiding principles on internal displacement. Inevitably, remember, migration need not cross international borders. They happen continuously inside the country. For example, in India, look around. Most of the people around you might will be migrant. All your service providers are migrants. People are migrating all the time. Resolution of 997 39 on internal displaced people, different phases of displacement, protection against arbitrary displacement, access to protection and assistance. So when you hear news items about the municipality coming and breaking out houses and calling them illegal, and then these people come on camera and says we have been living here for tens or 20 or decades or multiples of decades. Obviously the system has collapsed, because for a simple reason, when these people came in, suppose it's an illegal occupation of land, uh, when they were illegally occupying, what was the agencies doing? Why were they allowed to settle down? Why was electricity connections given to them? And then once they are there, why are you displacing them without any alternates accommodation for them, alternate settlement and reintegration? You cannot keep displacing people's lives. A principle intended to guide state concerning authorities, intergovernmental or non-governmental organization, consciousness on internal migration. And if you keep, displacing people, it does not augur well for the economy, because you break somebody's house, and that house, for example, when COVID lockdown happened and the migrants went back, suddenly the cities did not know how to cope with the various functions for which the migrants do the job. They recognize the problems of internal displacement in several countries, explores the silence of international law affecting millions. So when particular city says that you need to learn the language, and throws people out, now it is affecting the state. It is affecting the economy of the state. It is setting up a bad precedent. Provide protection and assistance to internally displaced people, and devise an institutional arrangement to help poor, dispossessed, and vulnerable people. And inevitably, it is going to be the poor, dispossessed, and vulnerable people who will be migrating first. Because look at the fact, all rural to urban migration in India happens because either there is no work, or the fact is the persons are in such abject poverty in the rural areas to be able to find some work in the urban areas. So there is a United Nations High Commission for Refugees established in 50s. It's one of the instruments of migration regime, headquarters in Geneva, responsible for upholding the 51 Convention on Refugees. But we are seeing what is happening, what is the state of Israel doing to the Palestinians in the state of Gaza, uh, uh, almost as if the convention is just not being practiced, and the world community is not able to do things in terms of it's multiple people are saying there is a famine, there is starvation happening. This UNHCR relevant data regarding asylum seekers, refugees, returnees, state-led persons, internal displaced persons, to formulate policies. And again, unless you have the data, how do you formulate a policy? Assist government and other organizations in dealing with issues of human trafficking, overcome migration. Management takes into account mixed migration, what I talked about mixed migration, in terms of multiple types of people, multiple types of migrants using the same route. It's highly complex, hence demands due to research and efforts. And unless, and again, because it is so complex, and multiple migrants are moving, unless there is cooperation between various states, you cannot manage these issues. Then there is a United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. OCHA coordinates humanitarian partners at country, regional, and global levels to provide necessary assistance and protection. Again, as I said, in all these, one of the underlying things is that it's the story of human beings. And human beings have rights. In spite of the fact they might be undocumented, they are human beings. So there is a migration and sustainable development agenda, 17 sustainable development goals. Goal 10 to reduce inequality within and among countries. Asserts to facilitate orderly, safe, and regular and responsible migration and mobility of people implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. And that's where the migration governance comes in. In the absence of a migration governance, you will have ad hocism and generally disorderly movement. So there are some regional instruments, African Union Convention for Protection and Assistance of Eternal Displaced People. We had read about a couple of African states signing up with the Gulf, where, for example, Egypt had signed up, a treaty because a lot of migrants from Egypt were going to the Gulf. So these African Union Convention for Protection of Assistance, Kampala Convention, example of a regional mechanism to address the issues of internal displacement among African countries. For example, India and Nepal have this treaty whereby people from India or people from Nepal can go into each other's state without a visa. Impact of politics of my immigration and immigration, power asymmetry in international politics, where powerful states dictate terms and increase the cost for weaker states to comply with in these terms and rules. For example, see between the US and India. Why would you put Indians in chains and send them back into India? They didn't, but the fact is, the interesting fact is, even a lot of Europeans were taken into detention centers. So, somewhere down the line, the US, current situation in terms of immigration is quite crazy. Betts has aptly described the inherent dynamics at play by arguing that in the absence of a binding institutional frameworks, receiving states have discretion to open or close their borders. And in spite of what we were reading about transnationalism, about state barriers being reduced, there are other non-state actors are at play. The state is still a powerful and a dominant entity. And why the state is a powerful and a dominant entity? Because it's the power to stop or receive people from outside, discretion to open or close the borders, rule making. While sending states have generally to accept the decision of the receiving states and thus are implicit rule takers. So, you have no choice as a sending station, as a standing state. In the absence, and there is this geopolitics at play. Context of migration having no specific global law favors the global north so they can exercise their own discretion and do cherry picking while accepting and denying entry to migrant. So, for example, the student visa suddenly started to practice by the US talks about social media. It is almost like cherry picking. How do you decide which student to take or which not to take based on social media, which is more like an informal way of chatting with the world? Issue of immigration is a matter of debate worldwide, touches not only politics but economics, demographic, national security, culture, language, and religion. And unless there is a larger debate and a larger talk about this on a national or an international scale, inevitably migration will always be, not a very orderly or a humane way to go about. Each member for which convention is enforced undertakes it so that national laws and regulations permit, takes all steps against misleading propaganda related to immigration and immigration. So so what typically the US elections were putting out was a propaganda against the immigrants, that the immigrants are criminals, the immigrants are this. We see that not just in the US, just about in every country of the world, including India. Despite the availability of some international law, almost all immigrant workers face the same set of issues like relegation to low paid, low status job, denial of labor rights, political disenfranchisement, state repression, racism, bigotry, and nativism. So, in spite of the world having moved so much, there is still so much to be done in terms of migration. And yet, we see that migration is going to be a major thing in the years to come by, with people moving all the times. And now, with an additional dimension of climate change, besides war and disease and everything else, the world, unless sits to makes sits to discuss, comes out with some concrete proposals, is going to be very haphazard. State control over immigrant labor, denial of civil, political, other citizens' right to immigration workers, not to prevent but to control the transnational movement. It's all about control. Lock the labor into a situation of permanent insecurity and vulnerability. And we have also seen, in a system of insecurity and vulnerability, people do not perform very well. The global working class has become divided into citizen and immigrant labor. What, again, during COVID time in India, the word migrant suddenly became very popular, as though people in the cities did not know before COVID lockdown that they were migrants all around. They were people from villages, from other places, who were working in the cities. The creation of this distinct category, immigrant labor, replaces earlier direct colonial and racial caste controls over labor worldwide. So, somewhere down the line, there is a capitalist system also at play, trying to control labor, trying to make the labor vulnerable and insecure, to be able to push down the prices, to be able to get a better deal out of the labor. So, we will read more about labor and labor processes in MDI 7 and MDI 8. So, what are the challenges to migration governments? Perceived erosion of national sovereignty. Between national sovereignty and international cooperation, application to migration policies. The states feel that with the presence of immigrants, they're going to lose power. Negative public perception of migration. Debated issues among countries. Public consider immigration as a grave threat due to perception created by media and politicians with better intent. Oh, this is a migrant who has done this. The migrants have done this, as though the locals are not doing anything. About migrants produce anti-immigrant feelings among the familiar people, leading to violence. And we are seeing this across the world. It is not that in a particular country. It's like that. Now, as the world is coming closer, there are forces at play to to split it wide apart. Lack of international cooperation. Each country has its own set of challenges. Due to their different identities, differences also arise out of real or perceived threats to security of the country, wage differential due to immigration, allocation of social services to the citizen of the country. So there is underlying identity politics at play. Challenging to bring consensus among countries over the global migration policies, cover all issues concern migration, compromising interest of some countries. Some countries feel that these immigrants, and this is a part of the politics, that these immigrants will change our culture, will overbirth us very shortly. This white country will become brown or black. Our language will go. These unnecessarily radical fears are pushed out in the media by politicians doing identity politics, leading to a general problem. Then there is an institutional apathy. Strong institution available at the global level for enabling smooth flow of goods and capital, but not in case of human migration. Few institutions that are solely focusing on aspect related to migration and its impact. Many not states not considering migration as a priority area under respective policy. So unless the states look at migration, because we have also seen the fact, see, for example, states are now looking diaspora as a priority area because there is remittances coming from the diaspora functions as soft power, but immigration and migrants are not being looked at as a priority area. So let's sum up. Field of study examining political forces, power dynamics, social inequalities shape policies and practice related to migration. Complex interplay between national interests, international cooperation, rights, and experience of migrants. Influence of global institutions, impact of securitization of border control, interplay between migration and development. So one, unless this is discussed, think about the fact in the Indian media how much space comes for migrants or migrant issues. You will hardly see any news item in terms of in forget international migration. Internal migration issues are not talked about. For example, resources to internal migration. All these migrants, how many migrants are coming from UP and Bihar into Delhi? Where are they staying? What is the kind of jobs they are doing? What is their educational level? What is happening in terms of their socio-economic well-being? Several dimensions, including policy on travel, temporary mobility, emigration, nationality, labor markets, economic and social development, So there are so many issues at stake, and unless these issues are, discussed in an interdisciplinary way, uh, the migration does not happen in orderly, humane, or well-managed way, including perceived erosion of national sovereignty, negative public perception of migration, lack of international cooperation, institutional apathy. So there are some references in the unit, and there are this other people who are editor of Global Mobility Regimes Explores Changing Landscapes of Migration. In fact, I have a book out here, Journal of International Migration and Integration, a Springer journal. So if you are interested in knowing more about international migration, and remember, these are broad-based, broad strokes overall, we have painted out here in this unit. When you look at individual cases, there are many more complexities which come into place. Remember, there are, politics between nations. For example, let's say politics between India and Pakistan, India and Bangladesh, India and China. There is politics at play. There is a geopolitics, global politics at play. There are other factors which come into the picture, which complicate the whole politics of migration governance. Okay, I have come to an end. In case, is there any question? Supriya, any question? Let me switch on my video. Hi. Any questions, Supriya? You can put it in the chat. Any questions, Supriya? Okay. So in case there are no questions, in case there are any questions, one can always put the questions on the WhatsApp group. People will answer there. You can write to me also directly, and so when you go through the unit, some questions might arise, which you can put it in the WhatsApp group and discuss it out. Okay, so so we will close out here. I'll see you tomorrow with MDI 3 between 5 and 7 tomorrow. Bye bye then. Thank you, Sada sir. I'm leaving. Bye bye.